My name's Sherry Davis, and I am President and CEO of Venture HCM. And I'd like to welcome you to our next HR Masters Wine and Wisdom conversation. We are a group of HR professionals who have been in the field for quite a while and have come together to have some rich conversation, to share information, provide tips and things of that nature. And so we are so glad that you have decided to join us for our conversation today. And so I'd like to start by introducing to you our participants on the call today. First, we have Jody Friend, who is the CEO of JLM HR Consulting. And then we have Darlene Tewaya, who is the CEO of Breakthrough Strategies. We have Susan Herbert Peacock, who is a Chief HR Officer with a nonprofit organization in the DC metropolitan area. And last but not least, we have Jackie Kendall, who is the CEO of Kendall Evolve Consulting. And so the topic that we wanted to focus on today is really how companies can work to ensure that they are addressing any racial inequities that are going on within their organizations, programs, systems, practices, and things of that nature. Over the last 2 weeks, many CEOs and presidents of US companies have issued statements regarding their personal as well as their organizational stance on the state of systemic racism that has been on full display in our country for some time now. So we really do, especially as HR practitioners, we really do applaud those who have stepped forward with boldness to condemn the police brutality of Black people and recognize that there are systems and institutions that have placed our citizens at disadvantages. That also includes, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, the policies and procedures and practices within our organizations. So we really believe that we are at a pivotal point in history where organizations can make a significant impact for change within the communities that they employ people as well as those that they serve. So the statements have gone out, the commitments have been made, the declarations have been made, and so what's next? And that's really what the focus of our conversation is today. And we really want to help leaders and organizations understand what actionable things that they can do to impact change, to ensure that there's inclusion and equity within the organizations. So I'd like to start with a question for each of you around what do you think are actionable steps organizations can take to ensure that they are creating an inclusive as well as equitable environment? So Darlene, can we start with you?
Sure. I think that what's going to have to happen is, do you hear a feedback?
No, you're good.
Okay. What's going to have to happen, I think the first thing that needs to happen is organizations are going to have to look at the why, answer the question, the why. There, as you said, there are many organizations who have already come out with their statements, and there are some organizations that have come out with no statement, have said absolutely nothing to their organizational members, to their employees, to their staff. So understanding the why, and for me, and for everyone else, if you're listening to the news, the why is to stay in business. Businesses were created to make a profit. Many companies are losing profits. Customers are withholding their business, terminating their memberships for those companies who have been found to be broadly, what would you call it, racist or
silent.
Or silent on the topic. So understanding that why and making a commitment to move forward.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, that's great. How about you, Jackie? What would you like to add to the conversation?
Sure. So I think that's a great point about thinking about the why. I think of, one of the things that organizations can do, and of course, I know we have long lists, but one of the things that organizations can do is to really if you think about emotional and social intelligence, to adopt that as a integral part of your organizational culture. And so in doing so, for example, one of the core fundamental aspects of emotional and social intelligence is self-awareness. So if an organization thinks about self-awareness, it's understanding and learning and getting really clear about your strengths, getting clear about your, your area, your weaknesses. For example, in this context would be what is the implicit bias that is happening within your organization towards people of color? Who are you hiring and how are you retaining them? For example, who do you consider the superstars and the high potentials? Looking at that and seeing, does it happen that most of the people that you consider are high potentials are actually white? Or do you have people in leadership roles that are, are people of color? Like, looking at all of that and building that awareness is a great first step, not only for individuals and building their emotional intelligence, but also for the organization. So uncovering and examining all of their practices and looking at the reality is the first step, and then deciding how to move forward in a way that is more inclusive.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Susan, what are your thoughts around inclusion and equity within the organizations?
Yeah, just to add to what Jackie just said, as far as the first step goes, I think that leaders and CEOs in particular need to be self-aware, but they need to also be authentic. This is a time where transparency is everything. And so these statements have no power if there are no actions behind them. So this is where I think, as we can see, this is the first time in my history, and I think I speak for everyone in our history, where we've seen this kind of involvement, this kind of activism around race and racial equity. So, we want to ride this wave and we want to capitalize on it. But when it comes to the leadership and CEOs, they need to understand that this is not a one-time, I'm not good with sayings, but one-trick pony or whatever the saying is. I make stuff up. But it's got to be sustainable, because your employees and this generation, we've got these different generations, they're going to hold your feet to the fire. They're going to make you accountable. And so you need to be authentic. You need to understand that that there's a lot of transparency. And so when you start speaking about having this interest in being diverse, and then I click on your website and I see your leadership and I see your board, you can stop right there, okay? Because your words mean nothing if you cannot, it's got to match up. So that's what I'm talking about when I say authenticity, is that in the past you can say, yeah, we've got diversity inclusion, we hired a VP, we've got a director who runs this program. Not anymore. This is not about having a diversity and inclusion program where you can say you have it. Oftentimes it's not even run by a person of color. Not that it has to be, but it's just that who are you and what are you about? So so back to what Jackie's saying, it's like, really, you got to drill down to the core of what it is, who you are and what you plan to do, because it's not a game anymore. You can't get by with it.
Okay, all right. Jody, any thoughts that you'd like to add?
Yes, and I think that leaders need to let themselves be vulnerable. As leaders, also, they need to recognize that they don't have to have all the answers, but they need to look not only to the other leaders within their organization, but look to their staff, look to their employees. Have a honest, open, authentic conversation about what matters to their employees. I think not enough leaders, think about what their employees are thinking about. I mean, we have, simultaneously almost two pandemics happening, right? We've got two pandemics happening. dealing with COVID-19, which has its own set of vulnerabilities and issues. And so I think that that has brought to the surface, some of just vulnerabilities of humans in general.
Yes.
And so I think that if leaders will be brave enough, bold enough to be vulnerable themselves, be open to listening not to respond, but listening to understand and hear the challenges, the concerns from their employees, and just really hear it and try to understand it. I think that's a first step. And I think part of that first step can also be having the conversations, call them courageous conversations, whatever, title you want to put on them, but have those conversations. And so I think that, some of the clients that I work with stepped up immediately and asked to have those conversations. And I think one of the things that I was pleased about with, some of our leadership with the clients that we work with was that they didn't know how to have the conversation, but they asked for help. And I think that, again, letting themselves be vulnerable in that way to say, this is a societal issue.
Yes.
And, that affects all of us. And how do I have a conversation? Where do I begin? And I need help with that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and so I think a couple of, I'm sorry, you going to say something, Jackie?
I was going to say, just adding, that whole listening and listening to understand is such an important component of empathy and compassion. And unless you have the conversation and unless you do the hard work that is so uncomfortable in this space, it's really hard to have these conversations. But you got to just be okay with being uncomfortable. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable in order to grow as a result of this. It has to happen. It just has to happen.
And I appreciate that, because I actually very much agree with that. And so I want to ask, because we know that people are struggling with having the conversations. And from my perspective, it's, you don't have to agree, okay? Because we all have individual experiences, and that's the beauty of it, right? And so to your point, Jackie, and to Jody's point as well, just in terms of being able to ask a person, how are you doing? What is your experience? What do you need? And then just allowing them to be able to tell you that.
Yes.
Okay, and not feel that you have to solve the problem right away, that you have to agree, or any of those kinds of things. And for some reason, we know that it is probably fear that prevents people from having the conversations. And so Susan, you had mentioned listening sessions, and Jody, you just mentioned that your clients were asking for help. So I'm just curious in terms of what that looked like, what that help looked like, or what that advice was that you gave them, or how you assisted.
Well, we had a listening session today, and actually this was probably the third or fourth listening session, because different departments, the managers have met with their teams to listen. And so, the approach was to listen to understand, because we have diverse employees who come from different, we have international employees, we have, US employees, but everyone comes from a different place. And so some people, what's going on is so deeply personal and painful, they're not willing to come into a session and start talking about it. Whereas others may be more interested in speaking. So, it's a matter of trying to have a safe space, allowing people to speak if they choose to speak, and then also giving them the resources, like we have EAP, we have, individuals that you can speak with. Every Wednesday we put out a health and wellness, HR puts out a health and wellness e-newsletter, and we will have links to different, it could be yoga, it could be health, it could be emotional, but just resources, because as Jody said, we've got a pandemic going on. So we started doing this with the pandemic, and
Mhm.
now we've got extra stress where employees, are in tears, are crying. If you're a mother and you heard, George Floyd, and you
Right.
can't focus on your work.
Right.
If you're a mother and you heard that, it's like you're done. So we just have to continue to give them resources and to say, if you need to take time off because you can't come to this Teams meeting with a smile on your face, take that time off. And we've just got to be very understanding and give resources and support.
Okay, great.
And
Jody,
not,
go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, and not stay silent. I mean, that many people have said to me, I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to make a mistake. So then they're just not saying anything, and not saying anything to your staff, especially if you have, even if you don't have people of color on your staff, this is affecting everyone. So you can't hide behind not knowing what to say. You got to figure that out.
And it's interesting to that point, because I've actually had employees that have said to me, my manager has not said anything.
Yeah.
Nobody has said
I know.
anything, and they are very disheartened by it.
Yep.
Okay, because for them, it speaks to the values of the leader and the organization.
Absolutely.
And as we know, people have choices about where they work, right?
Mhm.
And so people will remember coming out of this, whether it was COVID, whether it was how they dealt with this, whole racial injustice situation that is going on, and how it's, impacting each of us personally. People will remember how you responded, how you treated, how you reached out, how you didn't, and they will move on.
Absolutely.
That's a good point right now, because we're looking at, to your initial question about, the statements have been made and now what? So, everyone's going through the emotional, and they're processing, did my manager ask me how I was doing? Did the company care about me? But when that settles, then it's going to be, tension's going to be on. So what are you going to do? Your board is still, white male. Your leadership is, it's eventually we'll get through the emotional part. And then there's going to be some strategic things that are going to be looked at. So, it's going to happen pretty quickly. How are we recruiting? What's our succession plan? That's going to come up pretty quickly. Right now, everyone's still kind of in the emotional stage.
Yeah, but I think it's important too to keep the conversation going. So you have the conversation, right? Initial conversations, but you got to keep it going. You can't just stop at that one conversation.
Right.
So, and I think, also as leaders, as HR leaders and practitioners, and Black HR leaders and practitioners, we're experiencing this too.
Yes.
I think probably all of us have had a personal experience, and I actually shared,
Jackie took a drink right when you said that. I didn't mean to cut you off, but she did.
One of the first conversations that I had, with the client group and their employees was, I shared my own personal experience because I wanted them to understand that, the experience that I had as an 8-year-old, when I heard about George Floyd and the way he was killed, that memory from 52 years ago, and I told him, I said, I'm 60 years old. And that memory came flooding back like it was yesterday. I remember, because I wanted them to know how visceral it was for me as a Black woman, that, as a mom, as a wife, I have a son, and that memory came flooding back just like it was yesterday. I remember where I was. I remembered it was sunny outside, all those things. And so I shared that, and again, in a way to hopefully shed, just, to let them know that this is real. This is a real experience that Black people have had for years and years and years and years. So let that sink in, the number of years that have gone by. and something that I thought, that I had probably buried, which I'm sure
Yeah.
I buried, it
Yeah.
came flooding back like it was yesterday. So,
Yes.
I wanted people to understand that and to hopefully feel my pain behind that,
Yes.
So,
Woo, woo,
So
woo,
I
woo.
think that now, since the letters have gone out, and after you understand your why, because you want to make profit, you want to stay in business, you don't want your business to be adversely impacted
Right.
by your lack of action. I think it's important for business leaders to start looking at the data. Leaders make decisions based on the data that they have. They don't need to collect any more data. It's there in your HRIS system, your human resources information system. You have the data on the salary, on the promotions, who are you hiring, where they're hiring them from. Look at that data and build a story. And like Susan said, you have to be real and authentic about the story because the data is not going to lie. And your HR people are going to have access to it. So build that story and admit to where there are inequities. Admit to where your leadership does not include people or women of color. And possibly call a town hall meeting and say, okay, this is the data. This is what the data says. This is where we're going to begin to look and fix or remedy this situation. And we need your support to help us do that. And then start to tell the employees what they're going to do. Actually give actionable steps about what they're going to do to alleviate all of these inequities and all of these exclusive non-inclusive behaviors that have existed since forever.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's out there.
Yes. I love that. I think,
Someone said today, I heard a term that stuck with me, resonated with me, conscious inclusion, right? So the data is going to tell you the story and you can look at trends, right? So you're not just looking at, okay, what's the snapshot today, but the trend of activity.
Yeah.
Because that's where it's going to tell you where there are some systematic things that may need to be addressed.
Right.
Absolutely. The other thing that
I'm sorry. When I mentioned looking at the data for some who may be watching are not in HR, looking at the data around salaries. Did I mention that was I specific about what I was talking about?
A few things. You mentioned a few things.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make that point.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was going to piggyback on that and say, once you look at the data and you communicate sort of, here's the actions that we are going to take, and everybody is responsible for this, not just the CEO or not just the head of DE&I. If you have somebody in that role, everybody in this organization is responsible for creating an inclusive environment. And then you've got to hold people accountable for it. Every organization, like we know people in the organizations, they know the people who are, who might be the ones making racist jokes, or the people in the organization who automatically assume that the Black male is not going to perform as well as the white male. I mean, you already know the people in your organization who have demonstrated through their actions and behaviors that they have that racial bias. And so you got to call them out. They have to be held accountable. I feel like, when we were looking at the Me Too movement and organizations were saying, we have zero tolerance for it, that we need to have a zero tolerance for racism. I mean, the time is now. It has to happen.
And we have a role.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Susan.
I was going to say, we have a role as HR professionals. Sometimes we get tired in organizations. And yeah, we've seen, this behavior. He's been doing this. They're not, I brought it to their attention. Nothing's happening. But this is a time where, again, we have to take advantage of this movement because as professionals, we can't allow this to continue. To Jackie's point, we know who the people are. We know what they've done. We know every complaint that's come through. We conduct the exit interviews. We know. And so it's really our responsibility to find a way to be impactful and effective in compiling and getting that data, aggregate data, however you want to do it, and bringing it to the attention so that it doesn't continue, because you can't be authentic if you're just sweeping it under the rug. You know, those behaviors, and like you said, everyone's responsible. So everyone has a responsibility, no matter what level they're at, what position they're in, to report, you know, any inequities that are going on, because otherwise we won't know. And then once we know, we have a responsibility to do something about it.
Absolutely. You talk about the accountability piece. So, you know, bake that into your performance management programs, right? Your systems, your processes, right? So, you know, that should be a line item, or, you know, something that, you know, all staff are rated on, you know, whatever that looks like, you know, whatever is decided upon, but that should be, you know, the accountability piece. It needs to be baked into the systems, because that's how you begin to change the system.
Yeah, your comments, all of your comments really resonate with me, because, you know, I've done D&I work in the past and have had some people reach out recently that want to have conversations like you, Jody, you talking about, want to have training. And for me personally, and as an HR practitioner, my antennas are up. It's like, okay, we're going to do this, but it's not going to be the same thing that we've been talking about forever.
Sad.
You know, because everybody has a plan, everybody says it's great, this is what we need to be doing, but the whole accountability piece and the consistency in terms of that application has historically been missing.
Absolutely.
Historically been missing. So if I'm going to say what's going to be different today in terms of, you know, if you are asking me or any of us to come in and help you, it's going to be about the accountability and the fact that everybody has a role in this, because what organizations are systems of people, right? We all have implicit bias anyway, because that's just a human part of it, right? So we need to be educating and training people, and everyone has to be held accountable and create and engage in that self-awareness activity, because it's just not the leadership, it's everybody within the organization as well.
Yes.
And just like Susan said, you know, in the organization, you know who the repeat offenders are. You know how many times as an HR practitioner, you've had that conversation with your CEO about this oppressive leader. So one radical action that could be taken to allow your employees to see that you truly are serious about this is doing a leadership audit, and then take action based on that, based on the outcome of that audit. You know what good leaders you have. You know what leaders are oppressing your employees.
Yes.
Are racially dividing your employees. You know what leaders are compensating their employees based on who they know, what color they wear. We know who they are. So doing a leadership audit and taking action based on that data as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I have read, and I mentioned this to you in our just general conversations, I have read a couple of messages that have made it clear to me, if you work for that CEO, you're on notice. And so that's in my opening comments when I mentioned boldness, I had some specific people in mind, because they have made it clear it's not going down here. You know, and you're doing, to your point, Darlene, when we started, your business a service in that, as well as your employees.
I mean, even today, I think it's about 5, I was watching CNN, and about 5 CEOs had to resign because of their past practices or current tweets about the current events.
Yeah, exactly.
We got to get serious about it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Are there any other key points that anybody would like to make that have resonated with you through this conversation?
Well, you know, I have hope, you know, this time, you know, but again, we've got to seize the moment. And I can't remember which one of you all said that, but we have to seize the moment. Now is the time that we have to make, you know, radical change, quick change, sustainable change in our organizations, but just in our society and, you know, systems. But, you know, we can't do everything at once. You know, we're not, you know, Superman or Superwoman, but I think that within our own organizations or within the clients that we are working with, and I think, you know, and I'm saying that, but I think part of that too is we also have to make conscious choices. So, as you know, we're all business owners here, but you know what? You know, if I think my approach to bringing on a new client, the questions that I'm going to ask a new client are going to be different. It's going to look different because I want to spend the rest of my working life working with organizations and companies and clients that, you know, embrace
That
inclusion.
align with your values.
Okay, and that
Yeah.
align with my values. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, you know.
And that's moving in authenticity. So I really respect that.
Any
do
other
too.
words of wisdom that
think
you would like to leave?
The word that
What
keeps
is it?
popping in my head is courage. Like it's
Yeah.
time for everyone to step up and have the courage to speak out and stand up and stand for equality and justice. And there's so many resources out there. Oh, so many wonderful books about, you know, how to, on a personal level, embody anti-racism. And so everybody has to just be courageous and be open to it. And then in terms of organizations, you know, part of the responsibility is not only within your organization, but to the society, and thinking about your organization as a member of society and your responsibility within that is important.
Good point.
Yeah, I was going to say too that as HR professionals, it's a good time to develop our competencies. You know, we need to be really proud of the work we do. As we know, we've been in the business a long time, each of us, and when things aren't going well, like the pandemic, when businesses are losing money, what do they look at first to cut? HR, training, diversity, all of the things that we, you know, that really embodies who we are and the value that we know these things bring. So at this point, for all the companies that were getting ready to lay off their diversity people and shut down the programs, it's amazing what a difference a week makes.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
you know, it's like, you know, it's a sad and horrible, unfortunate situation that culminated so far. And hopefully it will not continue with George Floyd's murder. Been going on, but this, for some reason, if you're a spiritual person, the universe decided right now that this was the time that things were going to change. And as HR professionals, we aren't necessarily ready, but I'm thinking that, you know, and I'm just saying collectively, that this is a good time for us to really shore up our skills, develop, be ready, because the companies are going to rely on us now. HR practitioners, all of our, you know, subject matter experts in HR, you know, advisors, mentors, coaches, and particularly the DEI professionals.
Right.
They are really going to be, hopefully companies are smart enough right now to know that this is not the time to lay them off.
And we know it's hard work, right?
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, organizations and leaders are now having to recognize what it really means to be people-centric.
And it's work that people, that managers, many managers don't really feel comfortable doing. We don't have a problem going into a challenging situation and mediating, you know, these differences or any kind of employee relations issue. You know, it's like no big deal. We, you know, who, where, what, just what time, and we're there, you know, because that's what we do. But managers don't want it. They think it's confrontational. They think that, you know, it's whatever they think they avoid, and that's why things bubble up.
Exactly.
But it's time, like what you said. Now people can see this is not easy work. You've got to have a skill set for it. It's not as difficult for some of us who've been doing it for a while, but it's not easy work, and it's not a natural thing for people to do, to be able to jump into a conflict and start working people through it and trying to come up with, some type of a balanced approach. So.
My final word is, if you still, after listening to this conversation, are reticent about getting started or confused about how to get started, you have 5 HR consultants on this live that can support you in coming up with a plan.
That is a fantastic way to transition. Thank you so much, Darlene. And so thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And we hope that we have encouraged and inspired and provided you a level of comfort in terms of, if you're an HR practitioner, understanding this is your time, okay? And you can add tremendous value at this time. If you're a leader watching this, we understand this is hard work, okay? But we are here to support you, okay? And so we will continue to discuss and decide, what topics we want to bring to you all that we feel can really provide you some support and guidance throughout this time of uncertainty and difficulty for many. So thank you for joining, and we will see you the next time.
Cheers.
HR Masters Wine and Wisdom.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.